for a family of 4 in the United States for 2017, for them to be able to be at the 100% of the poverty rate, that's $24,000 a year. And that really does not account for the costs now of living in the United States.
According to numbers from the State of Kansas report, over 18% of Kansas kids live in poverty. That's a 24% increase in the last 10 years. A report from Kansas Action for Children shows that childhood poverty in Kansas has increased 22% over the last 5 years, and that 98 of the state's 105 counties saw an increase in the number of children receiving food assistance. When those numbers are combined with a reduction in publicly funded safety net programs, it means that Kansas families are stressed and struggling with day-to-day life. On today's Sound Living, a look at one effort that works to reduce poverty in the state and K-State Research and Extension's role in that effort. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Statistics show us the number of families in poverty is increasing, but it takes conversations with those families to put a name with a face. That's the idea behind a Center for Engagement and Community Development Incentive Grant devised by 2 Kansas State University researchers, Elaine Johannes, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist in K-State School of Family Studies and Human Services, and Gregory Paul, Associate Professor in the Department of Communication Studies. In talking with K-State Radio Network's Richard Baker, Johannes says the proposal, Bridges for Kansas Families, the role of social capital in Kansas families living in poverty, is designed to engage impoverished families in a community conversation.
I guess what was drawing me to the issue of families living in poverty was the fact that I'm aware that I live in a community where poverty rates are going up, and many of the people in our community don't seem to notice it. And as I and my students have observed, people who seem to be having a tough go financially also have some ways to survive and do very well. And I wanted to study that. I wanted to find out, how does a parent who's trying to raise kids in a really tough environment, how do they communicate and show resilience and fortitude to those kids and with those kids? And then how do the children respond and react? So it was an effort to not only understand poverty more in families, but also understand what's positive about it and how can we learn from that.
Give me some idea what you did learn from that.
From a parent standpoint, Richard, we learned that parents are really trying to protect the child and are really trying to maintain the family in a normal routine to the best that they can. Parents who live in families who are having financial issues are working multiple jobs, are trying to put, food on the table, are trying to persevere, and they're protecting the child a lot. They're carrying around with them sleepless nights, concern, stress. And the parents are trying to maintain some normalcy based upon what that community or based upon what they think is normal. On the other hand, we interviewed the children who were teenagers, and they know that occasionally maybe there's some tough times or some difficulties around a Christmas holiday and gifts and such like that, but they really don't understand the burden that the parents or the adult is really bearing. So sometimes that teenager would probably like to know more about how is mom, how are dad, how's uncle being able to manage all this, and what can they teach me to do? Because I know that as I grow up, there might be tough times, and how do I persevere? And so that's really what our finding was. Parents are trying to protect the child to the point that the child's not learning resilience and maybe not demonstrating it because they don't have the chance to see an adult do it. Because adults are trying so hard to maintain and to cope with stress. And we aren't showing to that adolescent how do we manage in our own tough times because we don't talk about it.
Living in poverty. Define living in poverty in Manhattan, Kansas.
Well, we could say there's a technical definition 100% of the federal poverty guidelines, up to 185%. That's typically what would be necessary for a family to receive some kind of assistance. So that's a financial amount. That's not very much for a family of 4. And it ranges based upon how many people are in the family and what the federal government allows at the time, or the state government allows. We also understand that poverty can be defined in a way that there's limited access to resources such as a car, such as an education, such as a job, such as health insurance, such as adequate housing. So there's different ways to look at poverty based upon, do I have the things that this society says I have to maintain and sustain in this community? And that's not usually what the federal government uses to say that this family is impoverished and they're having a tough time. But there's another way to define poverty, and it could be poverty of just social connection, friendships, lack of support, lack of persistence, lack of being able to feel like I can live. And that to me is probably most difficult to deal with because it depletes the soul and it depletes people's connection. In a community similar to Manhattan, we have some really excellent services, and so that 100 to 185% of the poverty range is usually dealt with by our service agencies, the faith community. So the financial means of dealing with having no money is taken care of pretty well by our agencies. But it's the other part of poverty which is most difficult: lack of connection, lack of support from a personal perspective, lack of feeling part of community. And that to me is more depleting and more of concern, because when somebody feels I have no value, I have no worth as being part of the community, people start to disengage, they isolate, and the issue of shame becomes a really difficult issue to deal with. And our children can notice that with their parents, but they just don't know what's going on if the parent doesn't communicate it and doesn't show that we may be having a financial tough time, but we're still rich in our connection and support and being part of the community still.
You said 100% to 185%. Give me some idea what that means in dollars and cents.
So if memory serves, for a family of 4 in the United States for 2017, for them to be able to be at the 100% of the poverty rate, that's $24,000 a year.
I cannot visualize living on $24,000 a year. Mm-hmm. That in itself has got to be frustrating.
Yeah, and it's very stressful. So as I and our students and some faculty and some other people in the communities across the state have taken this on, we've become more aware. I happen to be a state extension specialist. I work for Extension. I have counterparts across the state who work in similar areas that are working with families who are considered poor. And those agents, extension folks, are working with families around how to provide a meal, how to keep your house clean, how to manage the family. They are involved with not-for-profit groups such as Thrive or Ripples of Change, others across the state that are trying to make connection between people who are well off, middle class, upper class, and people who are having a tough time. And so we are trying to create bridges between people in communities to share resources, not financial necessarily, but maybe resources of knowing that there's a job out there. Or we'll weave together opportunities to do a shower for a mom that's going to have her first child. So there are efforts underway to bridge the haves and the have-nots. But one of the first things that we learned in our studies were, again, parents who are having a hard time, can we help them communicate their resilience, their positive fortitude to their teenagers in such a way that the teenager is learning, I matter, I can persevere, and as I grow up to adulthood, I can continue to maintain and contribute back to the community.
This was a study of Manhattan.
Well, it was multi-communities. Study in Manhattan, study in McPherson, study in Wichita, and in Ottawa. So, Richard, we have a snapshot of urban, semi-urban, rural, different groups of families, but still, it's the family and the teenager in all those communities.
What do we need to do?
From an upper class, middle class, privileged class perspective is to not judge and to take our blinders off and be aware that poverty is insidious, it's growing in this state, and it's right next door. It's right in our workplaces, it's in our classrooms, and it is not somebody's fault. As far as people who are living in poverty and are persevering every day and are contributing the best they can to their families, continue to do that, but open up and share what you're learning and the resilience you have with your child. Our teenagers are asking, how do I grow up? How do I become an adult and function and contribute in tough times? And I think it's the responsibility of the adults to not shy away from sharing the realities of either a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, a financial disaster, whatever is going on, and show to that teenager that adulthood can be tough, but we are a resilient species, and as a family, we'll make a go of it together. And we have worth, even though we're having a tough time.
You said your study's not done. Where do you go next?
We continue asking families to tell us their experiences. We don't know enough. As you might guess, poverty fluctuates based upon what the industries are, what the educational opportunities are, how the community grows and morphs. We continue to ask people in Wichita, people in Manhattan, in Ottawa, tell us about your life and tell us about how you transmit resilience to your child. And that kind of takes the parent back a little bit because they've never thought about their own behavior, what they talk about in their families, and how they share their survival skills, their thriving skills with their child. So we don't know enough yet, but we continue.
Ultimately, what do you think you're going to do with your results?
Well, from an extension standpoint, I want to really create materials, curriculum, and opportunities for the middle class and upper class to understand, first off, poverty, and second, understand their role in bringing about the resilience that families who are poor have already. It's our responsibility, the privilege, to go ahead and do what we should be doing. We should be making sure that the community is safe for everybody, that everybody can have an opportunity to thrive. And so consequently, we're going to take the resilient skills that those parents are teaching us and the resilient requests that those adolescents are asking us, and we're going to be teaching the volunteers in faith communities, in social services, in churches and schools on what can we do to bring about those resilient skills and actually have them grow. It's much more difficult than just giving a person a check or giving them a meal for a day. We are in the business of helping build resilience and build skill across the lifespan. And so that's really what our study's about. That's
the job, one way or another, that Extension was set up to do, is it not?
Right, it is. Our job is to engage and live with people in the community, to be part of the community, to understand it, and to bring to the community the things that science, knowledge, experience have to improve the quality of life of everyone, not just a chosen few. So we think our study is really aligned well with the intent of Extension, with the mission of the land grant, and with our hope that all communities can work collectively across class, color, creed.
That's Elaine Johannes, an associate professor and extension specialist in K-State School of Family Studies and Human Services. She spoke with K-State Radio Network's Richard Baker. More information on programs to assist families in need is available at county and district extension offices and on the Extension website, www.ksre.ksu.edu. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.